The December sun hung low over the Texas hill country as Emma Carter's weathered Ford F-150 rumbled down the gravel driveway leading to her parents' ranch. The truck's engine made that familiar rattling sound it had been making for the past 6 months, the one her mechanic kept saying she should get looked at, but that she kept putting off because, well, teacher salaries didn't exactly leave much room for non-essential repairs. Through the dusty windshield, she could see the old limestone ranch house where she'd grown up, its wide front porch decorated with twinkling white lights and a wreath made of Texas cedar and red berries that her mother had probably spent hours crafting. The live oak trees that lined the property were strung with more lights, their gnarled branches reaching out like welcoming arms, and Emma felt that familiar mix of comfort and anxiety that always came with coming home for the holidays. She loved this place, loved her parents, loved the smell of her mother's pecan pie and the sound of her father's laugh, but she also knew what awaited her inside, or rather, who awaited her inside. Victoria's black Mercedes SUV was already parked near the house, gleaming in the afternoon light like some kind of luxury spaceship that had landed among the more modest vehicles, her brother-in-law Marcus's silver Audi right beside it, and Emma's stomach tightened as she pulled her truck to a stop near the barn, deliberately parking away from the expensive cars as if the distance might somehow protect her from the inevitable comparisons. She sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel, watching dust motes dance in the slanting sunlight through her windshield, and she could hear the distant sound of cattle lowing in the far pasture and the wind rustling through the dried winter grass. Christmas music drifted faintly from the house, something classic and jazzy, probably Nat King Cole, and Emma took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was 32 years old, a grown woman with a career she loved and a life that mattered, even if it didn't come with a 6-figure salary and a house in one of Dallas's most exclusive neighborhoods. She grabbed her duffel bag from the passenger seat, the same one she'd had since college, its fabric faded and one of the straps held together with duct tape, and as she stepped out of the truck, the cool December air hit her face, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke from the fireplace and the earthy smell of the ranch that always reminded her of simpler times. The front door opened before she even reached the porch steps, and her mother, Sarah Carter, came rushing out, wiping her hands on her apron, her face lighting up with that genuine joy that only mothers seem to possess, and Emma felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as she was pulled into a tight hug that smelled like cinnamon and vanilla and home. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you're here," her mother said, pulling back to look at her with those warm brown eyes that had comforted Emma through every scraped knee and broken heart of her childhood. "How was the drive from Austin? That truck of yours still running okay?" Emma forced a smile, not wanting to worry her mother with tales of strange engine noises and a heater that only worked intermittently. "It's fine, Mom. Got me here, didn't it?" Her father, Robert, appeared in the doorway, tall and weathered from years of ranch work, his face creasing into a smile as he opened his arms for his own hug, and Emma felt like a little girl again as she stepped into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of Old Spice and leather. "There's my girl," he said, his voice rough with emotion, and Emma wondered, not for the first time, why her father's simple acceptance of who she was could make her feel so valued, while her sister's constant judgment could make her feel so small. They walked into the house together, her mother chattering about the menu for Christmas dinner and asking if Emma still liked her sweet potato casserole with the pecan topping. And Emma was nodding and responding, but part of her attention was already scanning the living room, bracing herself for the encounter she knew was coming. The house looked exactly as it always did during Christmas, maybe even more decorated than usual, with garlands draped over every doorway, stockings hung on the massive stone fireplace, and a Christmas tree that had to be at least 10 feet tall dominating the corner of the living room, its branches heavy with ornaments collected over decades of family Christmases. Victoria was standing near the fireplace, a glass of what looked like white wine in her hand, and she turned as Emma entered, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light from the fire, her designer jeans and cashmere sweater probably costing more than Emma's entire month's rent. "Well, look who finally made it," Victoria said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, and Emma recognized that tone, the one that sounded friendly on the surface but carried an undercurrent of something else, something sharp. Traffic? Emma set her duffel bag down near the stairs, very aware of how shabby it looked in this room full of expensive luggage that she could see stacked neatly in the corner, matching sets and leather and high-end fabric. Not really, just finished up some grading before I left. Victoria took a sip of her wine, her gaze traveling over Emma in that assessing way she had, taking in the worn jeans, the simple flannel shirt, the boots that had seen better days. Still bringing work home with you? Emma, it's Christmas break. Even teachers get time off, don't they? There it was again, that little dig wrapped in concern, and Emma felt her jaw tighten, but before she could respond, Marcus emerged from the kitchen carrying a beer. And he gave Emma a warm smile that seemed genuine, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hey, Emma, good to see you." Marcus had always been kind to her, and Emma had never quite understood what he saw in Victoria, though she supposed her sister could be charming when she wanted to be, and there was no denying that Victoria was beautiful and successful and everything that society told you a woman should be. "You too, Marcus. How's the firm?" He shrugged, settling into one of the leather armchairs near the fire. "Busy, always busy, but that's law for you." Victoria moved to stand behind her husband's chair, one manicured hand resting on his shoulder, in a gesture that looked possessive to Emma, though maybe she was just being uncharitable. "Marcus made partner this year," Victoria announced, her voice filled with pride, and Emma could hear the unspoken comparison hanging in the air, the reminder that while Marcus was making partner at a prestigious law firm, Emma was still teaching third graders their multiplication tables. "That's great," Emma said, and she meant it, even though she could feel the familiar weight of inadequacy settling over her shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Congratulations." Her mother bustled back in from the kitchen, seemingly oblivious to the tension, or perhaps just determined to ignore it. "Emma, honey, I put you in your old room. Victoria and Marcus are in the guest room, and your brother should be here tomorrow morning with Jennifer and the kids." Emma nodded, grateful for the escape route her mother had inadvertently provided. "I think I'll take my stuff upstairs, maybe freshen up a bit before dinner." She grabbed her duffel bag and headed for the stairs, feeling Victoria's eyes on her back, and as she climbed the worn wooden steps, she could hear her sister's voice drifting up from below, not quite loud enough to make out the words, but the tone unmistakable. That particular inflection Victoria used when she was saying something catty disguised as concern. Emma's old bedroom was exactly as she'd left it, frozen in time like a museum exhibit of her teenage years, with faded posters on the walls and a bookshelf crammed with young adult novels and her collection of snow globes from various family vacations. She dropped her duffel bag on the bed, the same twin bed she'd slept in growing up, and walked to the window that overlooked the back pasture, where the last rays of sunlight were painting the winter grass gold and the distant hills were turning purple in the gathering dusk. This was the view she'd stared at countless times as a teenager, dreaming about her future, imagining all the things she'd do and become, and she wondered if that younger version of herself would be disappointed in how things had turned out, or if she'd understand that sometimes the life you build isn't the one you imagined, but it's still worth something. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled out to see a text from her best friend Rachel, who taught fourth grade in the classroom next to hers. "Surviving the family Christmas yet?" the message read, followed by a string of emojis, including a wine glass, a grimacing face, and a Christmas tree. Emma smiled and typed back, "Just got here. Already got the once-over from Victoria. It's going to be a long weekend." The response came almost immediately. "Remember, you're amazing and your life is not small no matter what your sister says. Also, wine. Lots of wine." Emma laughed quietly, feeling some of the tension ease, and she was about to respond when she heard footsteps on the stairs and then her mother's voice calling that dinner would be ready in about 30 minutes. She splashed some water on her face in the small bathroom she'd shared with Victoria growing up, noting that her sister's expensive skincare products were lined up on the counter like soldiers, while Emma's drugstore moisturizer looked sad and inadequate next to them, and she told herself firmly that the quality of your face cream did not determine your worth as a human being, even though some part of her couldn't help but feel like maybe it did, at least in Victoria's eyes. Dinner was her mother's famous pot roast with all the fixings, and they gathered around the big oak table in the dining room, the one that had hosted countless family meals over the years, its surface scarred with the marks of decades of use. Her father said grace, his deep voice thanking God for family and blessings and the food before them. And Emma kept her eyes closed maybe a moment longer than necessary, sending up her own silent prayer for patience and strength to get through the next few days without losing her temper or her dignity. The conversation flowed easily at first, safe topics like the weather and the ranch and her mother's plans for Christmas dinner. But Emma could feel Victoria gearing up for something, could see it in the way her sister kept glancing at her with that particular expression, the one that meant she had something to say and was just waiting for the right moment. It came during dessert, her mother's pecan pie served with homemade whipped cream, when her father asked Emma how school was going. "It's good," Emma said, taking a bite of pie that suddenly tasted like sawdust in her mouth. The next morning arrived with that particular quality of light that only Texas winter mornings seem to have, pale and clean, filtering through the thin curtains of Emma's childhood bedroom and pulling her from a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams she couldn't quite remember. She lay there for a moment, disoriented, before the events of the previous evening came flooding back, and with them the heavy weight of inadequacy that seemed to have taken up permanent residence in her chest. The house was quiet, that early morning stillness that meant she was probably the first one awake, and Emma considered staying in bed, hiding in her room like a teenager avoiding confrontation. But her bladder had other ideas, and besides, she'd never been one to hide from her problems, even when hiding seemed like the most appealing option. She pulled on her old college sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants and padded downstairs in her socks, the wooden steps creaking under her feet in a familiar rhythm that was almost comforting. The kitchen was empty, but someone had already started the coffee maker, probably her father, who'd always been an early riser, and Emma poured herself a cup, wrapping her hands around the warm mug and staring out the window at the back pasture, where morning mist was rising from the cold ground like ghosts. The back door opened, and her father came in, stamping his boots on the mat, his breath visible in the cold air, and he smiled when he saw her, that genuine, uncomplicated smile that made Emma's throat tight with emotion. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, pouring his own coffee and joining her at the window. Emma shrugged, not trusting her voice for a moment, and her father stood beside her in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only comes from years of knowing someone, of not needing to fill every moment with words. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and measured. "Your sister means well, you know. She just has a different way of showing she cares." Emma felt a flash of irritation, because why was it always her responsibility to understand Victoria, to make allowances for her sister's behavior, to be the bigger person? "Does she, Dad? Because from where I'm standing, it feels a lot more like judgment than care." Her father sighed, and Emma could see the weariness in his face, the toll that years of mediating between his daughters had taken. "Victoria's always been driven, always needed to prove herself. I think maybe she doesn't understand that not everyone measures success the same way she does." It was almost exactly what Emma had said at dinner, and she wondered if her father was trying to tell her something, trying to bridge the gap between his daughters without taking sides. "I'm happy with my life, Dad, I really am. I know it doesn't look like much compared to Victoria's, but it's mine, and it matters." He turned to look at her then, his weathered hand coming up to cup her cheek the way he used to when she was little. "I know that, sweetheart, and for what it's worth, your mother and I are proud of you. What you do, teaching those kids, making a difference in their lives, that's important work. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Emma felt tears threatening again, but these were different, warmer somehow, and she leaned into her father's touch for just a moment before straightening up and taking a sip of her coffee. They stood there together, watching the sun climb higher, burning off the mist, and Emma felt some of her resolve returning, her determination not to let Victoria's opinions define her worth. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of footsteps on the stairs, and Victoria appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking impossibly put together for 7 in the morning, her hair styled, her makeup perfect, wearing yoga pants and a fitted top that probably cost more than Emma's entire wardrobe. "Oh, you're up early," Victoria said, suggesting that this was somehow surprising, as if Emma were lazy or undisciplined.
I'm always up early. Teacher habits. Victoria moved to the coffee maker, pouring herself a cup and adding what looked like almond milk from a container she must have brought with her, because Emma knew her mother only kept regular milk in the house. I'm going for a run. Anyone want to join me? It wasn't really an invitation, Emma knew. It was another opportunity for Victoria to demonstrate her superiority, her discipline, her commitment to fitness and self-improvement. I'm good. I think I'll help Dad with the morning chores. Her father shot her a grateful look, and Victoria's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance before she smiled brightly. Suit yourself. I'll be back in an hour. She disappeared out the front door, and I heard the beep of a car unlocking, and I wondered why Victoria needed to drive somewhere to run when they were surrounded by miles of ranch land. But I supposed running on a treadmill at some fancy gym was more Victoria style than running on dirt roads. Her father drained his coffee cup and set it in the sink. Come on then, if you're serious about helping. The horses need feeding. Emma followed him out into the crisp morning air, breathing in the smell of hay and animals and earth, and for the next hour she lost herself in the simple physical work of caring for the horses, filling water troughs and distributing feed, listening to her father's quiet commentary about each animal's personality and quirks. This was the life Victoria had been so eager to leave behind, the rural, unglamorous reality of ranch work. But Emma had always loved it, loved the honesty of it, the way the animals didn't care about your job title or your bank account. They just cared whether you treated them well and fed them on time. By the time they finished and headed back to the house, the sun was fully up, and Emma could see her mother moving around in the kitchen, and the smell of bacon was drifting out through the screen door, making Emma's stomach growl with genuine hunger for the first time since she'd arrived. Breakfast was a chaotic, cheerful affair because her brother David had arrived with his wife Jennifer and their 2 kids, 8-year-old Sophie and 6-year-old Jake, and the house was suddenly full of noise and energy and the particular brand of chaos that only small children can create. Emma hugged her brother, who looked tired but happy, his hair thinning a bit more than the last time she'd seen him, and Jennifer, who was warm and genuine and had always treated Emma with kindness. The kids launched themselves at Emma with the enthusiasm of children who adored their aunt, and she scooped them up, one on each arm, feeling their solid weight and breathing in the smell of their shampoo and the undefinable scent of childhood. "Out, Emma! Did you bring us presents?" Sophie asked, her gap-toothed smile irresistible, and Emma laughed. "Maybe, but you'll have to wait until Christmas morning to find out." Victoria returned from her run just as they were all sitting down for breakfast, her face flushed and glowing, her body barely showing any signs of exertion, and she made a show of checking her fitness watch and announcing her mileage and pace, and Emma saw Jennifer's eyes glaze over with polite disinterest. The breakfast table was crowded and loud, with the kids chattering about their drive and what they hoped Santa would bring, and David and their father discussing cattle prices and weather patterns. And for a while she could almost forget the tension, could almost relax into the warmth of family and tradition. But Victoria had a way of steering conversations back to herself, back to her accomplishments and acquisitions, and before long she was telling Jennifer about the kitchen renovation they'd just completed, the Italian marble countertops and the custom cabinets and the professional-grade appliances. And Emma could see Jennifer nodding politely while trying to convince Jake to eat his eggs instead of building a fort with his toast. "You and David should come visit," Victoria was saying. "We'd love to have you. We have plenty of room now that we finished the guest suite. It has its own bathroom with rainfall shower and heated floors." Jennifer smiled, but I could see the strain around her eyes. "That sounds lovely. It's just hard to get away with the kids and David's work schedule." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I know how busy life gets. That's why Marcus and I make it a priority to take time for ourselves. We just got back from Napa last month. Have you ever been? The wine country is just stunning this time of year." Emma watched Jennifer's smile become more fixed, and she felt a surge of protectiveness for her sister-in-law, who worked part-time as a nurse while raising 2 kids and somehow managing to stay sane and kind. "It sure was beautiful," Jennifer said, and then turned to Emma with obvious relief. "Emma, the kids have been asking about you all week. Sophie wants to know if you'll read to her before bed like you did last time." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest, the kind of validation that actually mattered. Of course, I brought a couple of new books I thought she might like. Victoria's expression flickered with something Emma couldn't read. That's sweet. You're so good with kids, Emma. It's too bad you don't have any of your own. The comment landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort around the table. And Emma felt my face flush, because there it was again, another subtle dig disguised as observation, another reminder of what Emma didn't have, what she hadn't achieved. Does she, Dad? Because from where I'm standing, it feels a lot more like judgment than care. Her father sighed, and Emma could see the weariness in his face, the toll that years of mediating between his daughters had taken. Victoria's always been driven, always needed to prove herself. I think maybe she doesn't understand that not everyone measures success the same way she does. It was almost exactly what Emma had said at dinner, and she wondered if her father was trying to tell her something, trying to bridge the gap between his daughters without taking sides. I'm happy with my life, Dad. I really am. I know it doesn't look like much compared to Victoria's, but it's mine, and it matters. He turned to look at her then, his weathered hand coming up to cup her cheek the way he used to when she was little. I know that, sweetheart, and for what it's worth, your mother and I are proud of you. What you do, teaching those kids, making a difference in their lives, that's important work. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Emma felt tears threatening again, but these were different, warmer somehow, and she leaned into her father's touch for just a moment before straightening up and taking a sip of her coffee. They stood there together watching the sun climb higher, burning off the mist, and Emma felt some of her resolve returning, her determination not to let Victoria's opinions define her worth. The peaceful moment was
Christmas Eve morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of day where the sky stretched endlessly blue over the Texas hills and your breath came out in white puffs that dissipated almost immediately in the dry air. Emma had barely slept, her mind churning over Marcus's cryptic text message, and every time she'd started to drift off, she'd jolt awake with her heart racing, wondering what he could possibly need to tell her that was so important he had to sneak her phone number from her mother's contacts. She texted back a simple, "Okay, when?" but Marcus hadn't responded. And Emma had lain awake in the darkness of her childhood bedroom, listening to the house settle around her and trying to imagine what kind of secret her brother-in-law could be harboring that involved her. The house was already bustling with activity when Emma finally gave up on sleep and went downstairs, her mother orchestrating the day's preparations with the precision of a military general, assigning tasks and checking lists, and periodically stopping to taste whatever was simmering on the stove. Christmas Eve dinner was the main event in the Carter family, an elaborate affair that had grown more complex over the years as her mother added new dishes and traditions, and today the menu included a standing rib roast, her famous scalloped potatoes, green beans with almonds, homemade rolls, and at least 3 different desserts. Emma was put to work immediately, peeling potatoes at the kitchen sink while her mother seasoned the roast and Jennifer made a salad. And the 3 of them fell into an easy rhythm, the kind of comfortable cooperation that comes from shared purpose. Victoria appeared around 9, already dressed and made up as if she were going to a photo shoot rather than spending the day cooking with family. And she surveyed the kitchen with a critical eye before announcing that she and Marcus were going to drive into town to pick up some wine because the selection her parents had wasn't quite what she'd hoped for. Emma's mother looked slightly hurt, but covered it quickly with a smile. "Of course, dear, whatever you think is best." After Victoria and Marcus left, Jennifer let out a long breath and shared a look with Emma that was equal parts exasperation and amusement. "Is it just me, or has she gotten worse?" Jennifer asked quietly, glancing toward the doorway to make sure they were alone. Emma's mother made a small sound of protest. "Jennifer, that's not fair. Victoria's just particular about things." But even as she said it, Emma could hear the doubt in her mother's voice, the weariness of someone who'd spent years making excuses for behavior that was increasingly hard to excuse. "Mom, it's okay," Emma said gently. "We all know Victoria can be difficult. You don't have to pretend otherwise." Her hands stilled on the roast, and for a moment, Emma thought she might actually acknowledge the elephant that had been in the room for years, but then she shook her head and forced a bright smile. "She's just stressed. That big job, that big house, all those responsibilities, it's a lot of pressure."
Emma exchanged another glance with Jennifer, and they both went back to their tasks. But Emma couldn't help thinking about what Marcus had said yesterday, about how they were both under a lot of stress, and she wondered what exactly was going on in her sister's perfect life that was causing such strain. Victoria and Marcus returned an hour later with several bottles of expensive wine and a tension between them that was almost palpable. And Emma noticed that they weren't looking at each other, that Victoria's smile was brittle and Marcus's jaw was tight, and she wondered if they'd been arguing in the car. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of cooking and preparation, and Emma found herself constantly aware of Marcus's presence, waiting for him to find a moment to talk to her, but Victoria seemed to be keeping him close, finding reasons for him to help her with various tasks, and Emma began to wonder if her sister suspected something. David and their father had taken the kids outside to look at the cattle and check on the horses, and their laughter and excited chatter drifted in through the windows, a counterpoint to the strained atmosphere inside. By early afternoon, the house smelled incredible, rich and savory and sweet all at once, and Emma's mother declared that everything was under control and they should all take a break before the evening festivities began. Emma retreated to her room, intending to maybe take a nap or at least lie down and rest her eyes, but she'd barely settled on her bed when her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus. "Can you meet me at the barn in 10 minutes? Please, I really need to talk to you." Emma stared at the message, her stomach knotting with anxiety, and she typed back quickly, "Okay, 10 minutes." She waited exactly 8 minutes, not wanting to seem too eager or suspicious, and then she slipped downstairs and out the back door, walking casually toward the barn as if she were just taking a stroll to clear her head. The barn was dim and cool inside, smelling of hay and leather and horses, and Marcus was waiting near the tack room, pacing back and forth, and when he saw Emma, his expression was so anguished that she felt a spike of real fear. "Marcus, what's going on? You're scaring me." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration and desperation. I don't even know where to start. I shouldn't be telling you this, but I don't know what else to do, and you deserve to know, especially after the way Victoria has been treating you." Emma moved closer, her heart pounding. "Know what, Marcus? Just tell me." He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, the words came out in a rush. "We're broke, Emma. Or we will be soon. Victoria's been spending money we don't have for years, and I've been trying to keep up, trying to maintain this image she's so obsessed with, but I can't do it anymore. We're drowning in debt. The house, the cars, all of it, it's all mortgaged to the hilt, and we're behind on payments, and I don't know how much longer we can keep pretending everything's fine." Emma felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and she reached out to steady herself against a stall door. "What? But Victoria always talks about how successful you both are, how everything's going well." Marcus laughed, but it was a hollow, bitter sound. "That's all it is, Emma. Talk. Victoria's obsessed with appearances, with making sure everyone thinks we have this perfect life. And I've gone along with it because I love her, because I thought maybe if I could just make enough money, if I could just give her everything she wanted, she'd be happy. But she's never happy. There's always something else she needs, something else to buy or renovate or show off, and I'm exhausted, and I'm scared, and I don't know what to do." Emma's mind was reeling, trying to process this information, trying to reconcile the image of Victoria's perfect life with the reality Marcus was describing. Does she know? I mean, does Victoria know how bad things are? He nodded miserably. "She knows. We've been fighting about it constantly. That's why she's been so awful to you, Emma. She's taking out all her fear and frustration on you because you represent everything she's terrified of becoming. You're happy with less. You've built a life that's meaningful without all the material trappings, and it drives her crazy because it exposes how empty our life really is." Emma felt a complicated mix of emotions: anger at Victoria for her cruelty, pity for Marcus's obvious distress, and a strange sort of vindication that her sister's perfect life had been a facade all along. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus met her eyes, and she could see the desperation there. "Because I need someone to know the truth. Because I'm tired of lying and pretending. And because you deserve to understand that Victoria's behavior has nothing to do with you and everything to do with her own insecurity and fear. You have a good life, Emma. A real life. Don't let her make you feel like it's not enough." Before Emma could respond, they heard footsteps approaching the barn, and Marcus's face went pale. "That's probably Victoria looking for me. Please don't say anything. Not yet. I just needed you to know." He hurried out of the barn, and I heard him greeting Victoria with forced cheerfulness, making some excuse about checking on the horses, and then their voices faded as they walked back toward the house. Emma stood there in the dim barn, her thoughts spinning, and she realized that everything she'd believed about her sister's life, everything she'd been envious of or felt inadequate about, had been built on a foundation of debt and desperation and lies. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but instead she just felt sad. Sad for Marcus, who was clearly struggling, sad for Victoria, who was so trapped by her own need for validation that she'd destroyed her financial security and her peace of mind, and sad for herself, because even knowing the truth didn't erase the years of feeling less than, of internalizing her sister's judgment. Emma stirred in the barn for a few more minutes, composing herself, and then she walked back to the house where preparations for Christmas Eve dinner were reaching their crescendo. The dining room table had been extended to its full length and covered with her mother's best tablecloth, the china and crystal that only came out for special occasions, gleaming in the light from the chandelier. And the centerpiece was an elaborate arrangement of pine boughs, red berries, and candles that her mother must have spent hours creating. By 6 o'clock, they were all gathered round the table, dressed in their Christmas best, and Emma's father said a longer grace than usual, thanking God for family and health and the blessings of another year together. And Emma kept her eyes closed and tried to feel grateful, tried to focus on what she had rather than what she didn't, but she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's confession, couldn't stop watching Victoria across the table, seeing her sister with new eyes. Dinner was delicious. Her mother had outdone herself, but Emma barely tasted it, too aware of the undercurrents swirling around the table, the way Marcus drank too much wine too quickly, the way Victoria's laugh was too loud and too bright, and the way her parents exchanged worried glances when they thought no one was looking. After dinner, they moved to the living room for the traditional gift exchange, and this was the moment Emma had been dreading, because she knew her modest gifts would pale in comparison to whatever expensive items Victoria had purchased, and she braced herself for the inevitable comparisons and comments. The massive Christmas tree dominated the corner of the room, its branches heavy with ornaments and lights, and under it was a mountain of wrapped presents in various sizes, and the kids were practically vibrating with excitement, their eyes huge as they stared at the pile. Emma's father played Santa, as he always did, reading names off tags and distributing gifts, and the room filled with the sounds of tearing paper and exclamations of delight. Emma had gotten Sophie a collection of chapter books she thought the girl would love, and Jake a...
Emma's voice carried through the living room with a clarity that seemed to amplify in the stunned silence, each word of Marcus's message landing like a physical blow, and she watched as Victoria's face transformed from smug superiority to confusion to dawning horror as the full meaning of what Emma was reading penetrated. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending we're happy when I'm miserable. I can't keep lying to everyone about the debt, about the affairs, about any of it. Victoria's spending has destroyed us, and her cruelty is destroying me. I want out. I want a divorce. I want my life back." The last words seemed to echo in the silence that followed, and for a moment nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire family frozen like figures in a tableau, and Emma felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching the scene unfold from somewhere outside her body. Victoria was the first to break the spell, her face flushing a deep, mottled red, and she turned to Marcus with an expression of such fury and betrayal that Emma actually took a step back. "What the hell is this?" Victoria's voice was shaking, rising in pitch. "Why would you send that to Emma? What affairs? What are you talking about?" Marcus had his head in his hands, and when he looked up, Emma was shocked to see tears streaming down his face, his composure completely shattered. "I didn't mean to send it to Emma. I was texting my therapist. I've been seeing a therapist for 6 months, Victoria, because I've been having panic attacks about our financial situation, about our marriage, about everything. And you didn't even notice because you're so wrapped up in maintaining this perfect image that you can't see what's happening right in front of you." Emma's mother had stood up,
her hand pressed to her chest, her face pale. "Victoria! Marcus, please! The children!" David had already moved to usher Sophie and Jake out of the room, Jennifer following quickly, and Emma could hear Sophie's protests and questions fading as they were taken upstairs, and she felt a pang of guilt that the children had to witness this, but it was too late now. The damage was done. Victoria was standing now too, her whole body rigid with anger. "You're seeing a therapist? You want a divorce? And you thought the appropriate way to tell me this was by accidentally texting my sister?" Her voice dripped with venom on the last two words, and she turned to Emma with such hatred that Emma felt it like a physical force. "You couldn't help yourself, could you? You just had to read it out loud. You just had to destroy my marriage, my life, because you're so jealous of everything I have?" Emma felt her own anger flare, hot and righteous. "Everything you have? Victoria, you don't have anything. That's the whole point. It's all a lie. The perfect house, the perfect life, it's all built on debt and misery. And you've been so busy judging my small life that you didn't even notice your own falling apart." Victoria moved toward Emma, and for a moment Emma thought her sister might actually hit her, but their father stepped between them, his voice firm in a way Emma rarely heard. "That's enough. Both of you." He turned to Victoria, and his expression was stern. "Victoria, sit down. We need to talk about this calmly." But Victoria was beyond calm, beyond reason, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, and she was lashing out in every direction. "Calmly? How am I supposed to be calm when my husband just announced he wants a divorce in front of my entire family? When my sister just humiliated me under the Christmas tree?" Marcus stood up, swaying slightly, and Emma realized he was more drunk than she'd thought, the wine from dinner and the stress of the moment combining to loosen whatever filters he normally maintained. "I humiliated you? Victoria, you've been humiliating Emma all weekend. You've been humiliating her for years. Do you have any idea how cruel you sound when you talk to her? How small you try to make her feel?" Victoria whirled on him. "I was trying to help her. I was trying to motivate her to do something with her life, instead of wasting it in that dead-end job." Emma's voice cut through, sharp and clear. "My job is not dead-end, Victoria. I make a difference in children's lives every single day. I help them learn and grow and believe in themselves. What do? You push paper around a law firm and buy things you can't afford to impress people you don't even like." The words came out harsher than Emma had intended, but she didn't take them back, couldn't take them back, because they were true, and she was done pretending otherwise. Victoria's eyes were blazing now, and when she spoke, her voice was low and dangerous. "You have no idea what my life is like. You have no idea what it takes to succeed in my field, to maintain a certain standard, to be taken seriously." Marcus laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Succeed? Victoria, we're failing. We're drowning. I've been taking money from my retirement account to make mortgage payments. We're 3 months behind on the car payments. The credit cards are maxed out. We got a foreclosure notice last week that you threw away without even telling me about it, because you didn't want to deal with it." Emma's mother made a small sound of distress, and her father's face had gone hard, and she could see the disappointment there, the realization that her daughter had been lying to them, had been presenting a false picture of her life while looking down on everyone else. "A foreclosure notice? Victoria, why didn't you tell us? We could have helped." Victoria's laugh was harsh. "Help? How? By giving us money you don't have? By making me feel like even more of a failure?" She turned back to Marcus, and her voice broke. "And affairs? You said affairs, plural. How many, Marcus? How many times have you cheated on me?" The room went silent again, and Emma felt a twist of sympathy for her sister, despite everything. Because whatever Victoria's faults, learning about infidelity like this in front of her family was cruel. Marcus's face crumpled. "I haven't cheated on you, Victoria. The affairs I was talking about are yours." The words dropped like a bomb, and Emma saw her sister's face go white, saw the guilt flash across her features before she could hide it, and Emma realized that Marcus was telling the truth, that Victoria had been unfaithful. "That's a lie," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Marcus's voice was gaining strength now, as if finally speaking the truth was giving him power. "Is it that you've been having lunch with your ex-boyfriend from college every week for the past year? Is it that you went to Houston for a supposed work conference last month, and I saw the hotel receipt that showed you'd booked a room with 2 beds but only used 1? Is it a lie that I found text messages on your phone that were definitely not professional?" Victoria's face had gone from white to red again, and she was shaking her head, but Emma could see the truth written all over her sister's face, could see the guilt and the fear and the desperate scramble for a plausible explanation. "You went through my phone? You've been spying on me?" It was a deflection, an attempt to make Marcus the villain, but it wasn't working anymore. Her father's voice was heavy with disappointment. "Victoria, is this true? Have you been unfaithful to your husband?" Victoria looked around the room, at her parents' shocked faces, at Emma's mixture of anger and pity, at Marcus's grief, and something in her seemed to break. The last of her defenses crumbling. "It didn't mean anything. It was just, I was stressed, and he made me feel special. And Marcus was always working, and I needed something for myself." Emma felt a complicated swirl of emotions. Anger at her sister's hypocrisy, pity for her obvious pain, and a strange sort of grief for the family dynamic that was irreversibly changed. "So let me get this straight," Emma said, her voice quiet but cutting. "You've been cheating on your husband, spending money you don't have, lying to everyone about your perfect life, and all the while you've been tearing me down for having a small, insignificant existence?" Victoria's eyes met Emma's, and for a moment Emma thought her sister might actually lash out again, might find some new way to deflect and attack. But instead, she just nodded slowly. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm absolutely right. I did this, all of it." She looked around the room one more time, at her parents' disappointed faces, at Marcus's grief, at Emma's exhaustion, and then she turned and walked upstairs, her footsteps heavy on the wooden stairs, and a moment later they heard a door close. The remaining family members stood in the living room, surrounded by the remnants of their interrupted Christmas celebration, torn wrapping paper and abandoned gifts scattered around the still twinkling tree, and Emma thought about how quickly everything could change, how a single moment could shatter years of carefully maintained illusions. Her father cleared his throat. "I think we should all try to get some sleep. It's late, emotions are high, and we're not going to solve anything tonight." Emma nodded, suddenly desperate to be alone, to process everything that had just happened, and she started toward the stairs, but her mother caught her arm. "Emma, honey, are you okay?" Emma looked at her mother, at the concern and love in her eyes, and she realized that she was okay, or at least she would be. "Yeah, Mom, I think I am." She went upstairs to her room, passing Victoria's closed door and hearing the muffled sounds of crying from within, and she felt a complicated mix of anger and pity, satisfaction and sorrow. She sat on her bed and looked at her phone, at Marcus's message still on the screen, and she thought about how she'd read it out loud, how she'd made that choice in a moment.
Christmas morning arrived with a hesitant, gray dawn that seemed to match the mood of the house, the usual excitement and joy of the holiday muted by the events of the previous night. And Emma woke to the sound of quiet voices downstairs and the smell of coffee brewing, and for a moment she considered staying in bed, hiding from the inevitable awkwardness and tension that awaited her below. But she could also hear Sophie and Jake's voices, higher-pitched and excited despite everything, because children had a remarkable ability to compartmentalize, to find joy even in the midst of adult chaos. And Emma knew she needed to go downstairs, needed to try to salvage something of this Christmas for their sake, if nothing else. She dressed quickly in jeans and a soft sweater, ran a brush through her hair without bothering with makeup, and steeled herself before heading down the stairs. each step feeling heavier than usual, weighted with the knowledge of what had transpired in this house just hours before. The living room looked almost surreal in the morning light, the Christmas tree still twinkling cheerfully as if nothing had happened, the scattered presents from last night's interrupted exchange still lying where they'd been abandoned. And Emma's mother was in the kitchen, making pancakes with the determined cheerfulness that was clearly forced, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep or both. David and Jennifer were at the kitchen table with the kids, and they looked up when Emma entered, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. And Emma knew that David must have filled Jennifer in on everything after they'd gotten the children to bed. "Morning," Emma said quietly, pouring herself a cup of coffee and wrapping her hands around the warm mug like a lifeline. Sophie bounced over to her, seemingly unaffected by the previous night's drama, or perhaps just choosing to ignore it in favor of Christmas morning excitement. "And Emma, can we open more presents now? Mom said we had to wait until everyone was awake." Emma managed to smile, ruffling the girl's hair. "Let's have some breakfast first, okay? Then we'll see about presents." Marcus appeared from the hallway that led to the downstairs guest bathroom, looking haggard and exhausted, his eyes bloodshot and his face unshaven, and he gave Emma a small, apologetic nod before accepting a cup of coffee from her mother with a quiet "thank you." "Where's Victoria?" David asked, his voice carefully neutral, and Emma noticed that he didn't ask about his sister with any particular warmth, and she wondered what he really thought about everything that had been revealed. Their mother's hand stilled on the pancake batter for just a moment. "She's still in her room. I knocked earlier, but she said she wasn't feeling well and wanted to be left alone." The unspoken truth hung in the air, that Victoria wasn't sick, she was hiding, unable or unwilling to face the family after her perfect facade had been so thoroughly demolished. Their father came in from outside, stamping snow off his boots, and Emma was surprised to see snow, realized that it must have started falling during the night, a rare occurrence in this part of Texas, and under different circumstances, it would have been magical, a white Christmas in the hill country. "Roads are getting bad," he announced, hanging his coat by the door. "Forecast says we might get a few inches, which means everything was shut down because nobody around here knows how to drive in snow." Emma saw Jennifer and David exchange a glance, and she knew they were thinking about their drive home, about whether they'd be able to leave today as planned, or if they'd be stuck here in this house full of tension and broken relationships. Breakfast was a subdued affair, everyone making an effort to act normal for the children's sake, but the conversation was stilted and careful, avoiding any mention of the previous night, and Emma found herself watching Marcus, noticing how he barely ate, how his hands shook slightly when he lifted his coffee cup, and she felt a pang of sympathy for him despite the role he played in the drama. After breakfast, they gathered in the living room to finish opening presents, and Sophie and Jake tore into their remaining gifts with enthusiasm while the adults watched with forced smiles, and Emma kept glancing at the stairs, half expecting Victoria to appear, but her sister remained conspicuously absent. Emma's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to see a text from Rachel. "Merry Christmas. How's it going? Did you survive?" Emma almost laughed at the timing, at how inadequate the word survive seemed to describe what had actually happened, and she typed back quickly, "You're not going to believe what happened. I'll call you later. It's been insane." The response came immediately. "OMG, now I'm worried. Are you okay? Do I need to come get you?" Emma smiled despite everything, grateful for a friend who would actually drive through a snowstorm to rescue her if needed. "I'm okay, really. Just family drama of epic proportions. I'll fill you in later." She looked up to find Marcus watching her, and he gave her a sad smile, and Emma realized that he probably had no one to text, no friend to confide in, because he'd been so busy maintaining Victoria's perfect image that he'd isolated himself from any real support system. Around mid-morning, Victoria finally emerged from her room, and Emma was shocked by her appearance, her sister looking like a completely different person without makeup, her hair unbrushed, wearing sweatpants and an old T-shirt that Emma recognized from high school, and it was jarring to see Victoria so undone,
so stripped of all the polish and perfection she usually armored herself with. "Morning," Victoria said quietly, not meeting anyone's eyes, and she moved to the coffee maker like a ghost, pouring herself a cup with shaking hands. Sophie ran up to her aunt, oblivious to the tension. "Aunt Victoria, look what Santa brought me. It's a new art set with real watercolors." Victoria managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's wonderful, sweetie." She looked around the room, her gaze skipping over Marcus, over Emma, landing finally on her mother. "Mom, can I talk to you privately?" Their mother nodded, setting down the wrapping paper she'd been folding, always the one trying to maintain order even in chaos, and the two of them disappeared into the kitchen, and Emma could hear the low murmur of voices but couldn't make out the words. David moved to sit next to Emma on the couch, his voice low. So that was quite a Christmas Eve. Emma let out a breath that was almost a laugh. That's one way to put it. Her brother was quiet for a moment, watching his kids play with their new toys. And for what it's worth, I think Victoria had it coming. She's been awful to you for years, and someone needed to call her out on it. Emma felt a complicated mix of emotions at his words, part vindication, part guilt. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that. I didn't mean to blow up her marriage in front of everyone." David shook his head. "You didn't blow up her marriage, Emma. She did that herself. You just exposed what was already broken." Marcus had moved to stand by the window, staring out at the falling snow, and Emma watched him for a moment before getting up and joining him. And they stood there in silence for a while, watching the white flakes drift down and accumulate on the brown winter grass. Marcus said he meant what he said last night, not looking at her. "Thank you. I know it doesn't seem like it, but you did me a favor. I've been drowning for so long, and I didn't know how to ask for help. Didn't even know if I deserved help." Emma didn't know what to say to that, so she just stood there beside him, offering silent support. And after a moment, he continued. "I loved her, you know. I still do in a way. But somewhere along the line, we stopped being partners and became competitors. Or maybe she became the competitor and I became the audience, expected to applaud every new purchase, every new achievement, every new way she found to prove she was better than everyone else." His voice was thick with emotion, and I go along with it because I thought that's what love was, supporting your partner no matter what. But I realize now that I wasn't supporting her, I was enabling her. And in the process, I lost myself completely. Emma found her voice. "What are you going to do now?" Marcus finally turned to look at her, and his expression was a mixture of fear and something that might have been hope. "I don't know. File for divorce, I guess. Try to sort out the financial mess. Figure out who I am without her. It's terrifying, honestly, starting over at 42, but it's also kind of liberating, you know? Like maybe I can build a life that's actually mine instead of just being a supporting character in Victoria's show." Emma understood that feeling more than he probably realized. The liberation of stepping out of someone else's shadow, of defining yourself on your own terms rather than in relation to someone else's expectations. Victoria and their mother emerged from the kitchen, and Emma could see that Victoria had been crying again, her eyes puffy and red, but there was also something different about her. Something softer, more vulnerable, as if the armor she'd been wearing for years had finally been stripped away completely. Their mother cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Victoria has something she'd like to say." Victoria stood there in the middle of the living room, looking small and uncertain in a way Emma had never seen her, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I owe everyone an apology, especially you, Emma." She finally met Emma's eyes, and Emma saw genuine remorse there, genuine pain. "I've been horrible to you for years, and you didn't deserve any of it. You were right about everything you said last night. I've been so obsessed with proving I was successful, with showing everyone that I'd made something of myself, that I lost sight of what actually matters." Her voice broke, and she paused to compose herself. "The truth is, I've been jealous of you, Emma. Jealous of how content you are, how you've built a life that actually means something, How you have real relationships with people instead of just transactional ones based on what you can do for each other.
The snow continued to fall throughout Christmas Day, blanketing the Texas hill country in an unusual white silence that seemed to muffle not just sound, but also the sharp edges of the previous night's revelations. And by late afternoon, the family had settled into a strange new rhythm. Not comfortable exactly, but no longer crackling with the tension that had defined the past few days. Emma sat in the window seat of her childhood bedroom, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, and she thought about how much had changed in just 24 hours, how the entire foundation of her family dynamic had shifted, and she wasn't sure yet whether it had shifted for better or worse, only that it had shifted irrevocably. There was a soft knock on her door, and Victoria appeared in the doorway, still looking diminished somehow, smaller than Emma had ever seen her, and she held 2 mugs of hot chocolate, the kind their mother used to make for them when they were kids, with marshmallows melting on top. "Can I come in?" Victoria asked, her voice tentative, and Emma nodded, gesturing to the other end of the window seat. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their hot chocolate and watching the sunset, and Emma was surprised to find that the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was almost peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm when everything is exhausted and still. "I talked to Marcus," Victoria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Really talked to him, I mean. For the first time in probably years." Emma waited, not pushing, just letting her sister speak at her own pace. "He told me about the therapist, about the panic attacks, about how he's been feeling for months, and I realized I didn't know any of it because I never asked, never paid attention to anything that didn't fit into my perfect picture." Victoria's hands were wrapped tightly around her mug, her knuckles white. "He told me he wants the divorce to be amicable, that he doesn't hate me, he's just tired of being unhappy. And the worst part is, Emma, I'm tired of being unhappy too. I just didn't know how to admit it." Emma felt a wave of compassion for her sister. Complicated and messy, but real. "What are you going to do?" Victoria let out a long breath, and Emma could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else, something that might have been relief. "I'm going to let him go. I'm going to sell the house, pay off as much of the debt as I can, and start over. Mom and Dad said I could stay here for a while, just until I figure things out, and I think I'm going to take them up on it." The idea of Victoria moving back to the ranch, back to the simple life she'd spent years running from and looking down on, would have been unthinkable just days ago, but now it seemed like maybe the only path forward. "I also talked to my firm. I've been working insane hours for years, sacrificing everything for a partnership that I'm not even sure I want anymore, and I asked about going part-time, maybe doing more pro bono work, things that actually matter, instead of just helping rich people get richer." She laughed, but it was self-deprecating rather than bitter. They weren't thrilled, but they agreed. Probably because I'm good at what I do, even if I've been doing it for all the wrong reasons. Emma set down her mug and turned to face her sister fully. "Victoria, can I ask you something? When did it start? When did you start measuring everything by money and status and what other people thought?" Victoria was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkening sky, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I think it started in college. I was surrounded by all these people from wealthy families, people who'd never had to worry about money or what others thought of them because they just assumed they belonged everywhere, and I felt like such an outsider, like I had to prove I deserved to be there." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "And then I got the job at the firm, and everyone there was the same way. Designer everything, and expensive cars, and houses in the right neighborhoods, and I thought if I could just have all those things, I'd finally feel like I belonged, like I was successful, like I mattered." Emma felt a pang of recognition, because wasn't that what everyone struggled with in some way? The need to feel like they mattered, like their life had value? But it never worked. No matter how much I bought
or how impressive my title was, or how perfect my house looked, I never felt like it was enough. And I think that's why I was so awful to you, Emma, because you seem to have figured out something I couldn't. How to be happy without all that external validation, and it made me feel like even more of a failure. Emma reached out and took her sister's hand, and this time Victoria didn't pull away. You're not a failure, Victoria. You're just human. We all are. We all struggle with feeling like we're enough. They sat there as the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, brighter than usual against the snow-reflected darkness. And Emma thought about how strange it was that it had taken such a catastrophic Christmas to bring them to this moment of genuine connection. I don't expect us to suddenly be best friends, Victoria said quietly. I know I have a lot to make up for, a lot to prove. And I know trust isn't rebuilt overnight. But I'd like to try, if you're willing. I'd like to have a real relationship with my sister instead of just being her critic and judge. Emma felt tears welling up, but they were different from the angry, hurt tears of the past few days. These were tears of possibility, of hope for something better. I'd like that too, and she meant it, even though she knew it would be hard, even though she knew there would be setbacks and old patterns trying to reassert themselves. Victoria squeezed her hand. Your life isn't small, Emma. It never was. It's rich and full and meaningful, and I'm sorry it took me losing everything to see that. They heard footsteps on the stairs and their mother's voice calling that dinner was ready, and they stood up together, and as they walked toward the door, Victoria paused. Thank you, she said, for reading that message out loud. I know you didn't do it to help me, but it did help me. It forced me to face things I'd been avoiding for years, and as much as it hurt, I needed it. Emma didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded, and they went downstairs together to join the family. Dinner that night was quieter than usual, but not uncomfortable, and there was an honesty in the air that hadn't been there before, a sense that they could all finally be themselves without pretense or performance. Marcus announced that he'd be driving back to Dallas the next morning, despite the snow, that he needed to start sorting out his life, and Victoria nodded in understanding, and Emma saw them exchange a look that was sad, but also peaceful, the look of two people who'd finally stopped fighting and accepted the inevitable. David and Jennifer said they'd probably leave the day after, once the roads were clearer, and Sophie and Jake were already begging to come back and visit Grandma and Grandpa soon, and my mother was promising them that they could come stay for a whole week in the summer. After dinner, Emma found her father in his study, and she sat down in the worn leather chair across from his desk, the same chair she'd sat in countless times growing up when she needed advice or comfort or just his quiet presence. You doing okay, sweetheart? He asked, setting down the ranch accounts he'd been reviewing. Emma considered the question, really considered it. Yeah, Dad, I think I am. It's been a hell of a Christmas, but I think maybe it needed to happen. Her father nodded slowly. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the most necessary ones. I'm proud of you, Emma, for standing up for yourself, for speaking your truth even when it was difficult. Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. I'm sorry I ruined Christmas. He shook his head firmly. You didn't ruin anything. You exposed some truths that needed exposing. And yes, it was painful, but pain is sometimes part of healing. Your sister needed to hear those things, needed to face the reality of what her life had become. And as hard as it is to watch your child struggle, I think this might be the best thing that could have happened to her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and then her father spoke again. You know, when you girls were little, you were inseparable. Victoria used to follow you everywhere, wanted to do everything you did, and I've often wondered when that changed, when she started seeing you as a competition instead of as her sister and best friend. Emma thought about that, about the little girls they'd been before life and ambition and insecurity had driven a wedge between them. Maybe we can find our way back to that. Not exactly the same, but something better, something more honest. Her father smiled. I hope so, sweetheart. I really do. That night, Emma lay in bed scrolling through her phone, looking at pictures from the past few days, and she paused on one that David had taken that afternoon in the snow, all of them together, bundled up and smiling, and you couldn't tell from the picture that just hours before, their family had been fractured and raw. You could only see the moment of joy, the possibility of connection. She posted the picture to her social media with a simple caption. Not every Christmas goes as planned, but sometimes the messy ones teach us the most. Grateful for family, for truth, and for second chances. Within minutes, comments started appearing. Friends and colleagues sending love and holiday wishes, and Emma smiled, thinking about how everyone presented their best face to the world, their perfect moments and happy celebrations, and how rarely anyone shared the messy, complicated reality underneath. Rachel's comment appeared, "You're amazing, and I want to hear everything. Coffee date as soon as you're back?" Emma typed back, "Definitely. You're not going to believe this story." The next morning, Emma woke early to say goodbye to Marcus, and she found him loading his car in the pre-dawn darkness.